If someone had told me 40 years ago that at 67 I would wake up every morning feeling like I had been hit by a truck, I would have laughed in their face. But life has a way of throwing surprises at you, especially when you least expect them. My name is Clarice Hampshire, and for the past 32 years, I have worked as an urban planning specialist for the city of Dallas. Not the most glamorous profession, I agree, but it has given me the opportunity to leave my mark on this city. A handful of lush parks, the revival of a forgotten historic neighborhood, and a network of bike paths that I am particularly proud of. My office, tucked away on the 8th floor of a drab grey municipal building, has long been my second home. Some days, I feel like the fluorescent-lit corridors and hum of the copy machine know me better than my own walls do. Today started like any other morning. I struggled to get out of bed, my joints creaking like the old floorboards beneath me, fumbled for my glasses on the bedside table, and checked my blood sugar first thing. Type 2 diabetes has been my constant companion for the last 15 years. The numbers were higher than normal, but not critical. I took my insulin injection, a ritual so ingrained, it felt like brushing my teeth. In the bathroom, I was greeted by my reflection grey hair pulled into a messy bun, crow's feet at the corners of my tired green eyes, and a face that wore the stories of 1,000 early mornings. I smiled at my reflection, an old habit I picked up from my father. Smile, Clarissa. Even when you're sad, especially when you're sad, he used to say. Breakfast was meager. Unsweetened oatmeal, a few almonds and tea. The house I had inherited from my parents always seemed too big for one person. A 1940s two-story with 4 bedrooms, rich with echoes of another time. Wooden floors that creaked in protest, high ceilings and generous windows that framed the quiet elm-lined street. After breakfast, I dressed for work. Beige pants, a simple white blouse, and my worn-out navy jacket I've had for over a decade. My sister-in-law, Honora, once joked that my wardrobe was stuck in time, just like my hair. I had said nothing then, but wanted to respond that not everyone needs to chase fashion to feel confident. The drive to work takes 20 minutes in my old but faithful Honda Accord, a car I bought after my divorce. Thoughts of divorce always stir, a mix of numbness and calm resignation. Garrison and I were together for 15 years before realizing our marriage had wilted into polite silence. I remember the day he told me he'd met someone new. Edwin was 12. He cried as his father packed his bags. I stood in the kitchen, mechanically stirring a pot of soup no one touched that night. Garrison moved to Arizona with his new love. Woman bursting with energy and ambition. They didn't last, as I later heard. By then, our divorce was final and Garrison had vanished west, visiting Edwin rarely, if ever. At work, it was a typical day. A long meeting about an industrial area. Redevelopment, several calls from irate citizens, and a mountain of reports that seemed to grow by the hour. Carol, my colleague of 20 years, dropped by with a paper cup of black coffee. "You look tired, Clarice. Everything okay?" she asked gently. I nodded, even though for the past 2 weeks I'd felt worse. Constant thirst, weakness, dizziness. Classic signs of unstable blood sugar, but somehow this time felt different. "It's just my age," I joked. "You said you'd call Dr. Reynolds." Carol insisted. "I'll do it today," I lied, knowing I wouldn't. After lunch, Edwin called. My son. Those 2 words alone stir a cocktail of emotions, love. Disappointment, guilt, pride, and sadness. "Mom, Honora and I want to stop by tonight," he said, voice stiff. "We've got some photos from our Europe trip to show you." His voice held the tone of obligation. Not love, not joy, just duty. "Of course, dear," I said. "I'll make dinner." "No, Mom, we already ate," he replied, Too quickly. A lump formed in my throat. Another subtle rejection. Another reminder that my role in his life was shrinking. They arrived just as I set the roasted chicken and vegetables on the table, despite Edwin's protest. Some habits you don't break, no matter how unnecessary they become. Honora stepped. In first tall, composed, a vision of effortless elegance. She surveyed my living room like a museum curator. "Clarice, these rugs must be as old as the house," she said instead of hello. "We saw similar ones in a Paris antique shop behind." Glass. Edwin didn't defend me. He never did anymore. I used to think I sacrificed for him because I loved him. After the divorce, I gave up a promotion that would have required traveling. I gave up a gentle, kind man, Thomas, a widowed teacher who loved poetry and sent me handwritten notes because Edwin disapproved. And now? Now I looked at my son, a stranger molded by time, and wondered if it had been worth it. "I've made dinner," I said, heading to the kitchen. "Mum, I told you not to," Edwin muttered. "We just ate out." Honora dropped a souvenir on the table, a notebook with an Eiffel Tower on the cover. "Got it in Paris. Thought you'd like it," she said with that patronizing lilt reserved for children and the elderly. I smiled, masking disappointment. For the next hour, I listened to their travel stories peppered with Honora's condescension. "You've never been to Europe, have you, Clarice? It's hard to understand until you've seen it for yourself." I nodded silently, remembering the trip to Paris I once declined 25 years ago, so I could help Edwin study for exams. "Mom, you've lost weight," Edwin suddenly observed. "You look pale." "Just tired," I replied quickly. "Busy at work." "Don't you think it's time to retire?" Honora asked, peering at me like I was a fragile antique. "I enjoy my job," I said evenly. "It's odd, really, holding on to work at your age. Your co-workers must be children to you." "Actually, I'm the youngest in my department," I said with a wry smile. Enjoying her flicker of surprise. Then Edwin dropped it. "Mum, we think you should consider moving to a retirement community." The room went still. My breath caught. "I'm perfectly fine on my own," I said, voice tight. "But the house is too big, and the porch is crumbling. I'll hire someone to fix it." "It's your health, Mom," Edwin insisted. "I've managed my diabetes for 15 years. I'll continue to do so." Honora rolled her eyes. "You're being stubborn. We're trying to help." I looked at my son, searching for the boy who used to hand me crayon drawings and whisper I was the best mom in the world. "This is my home. I'm not leaving." They exchanged a look. I knew it wasn't the last I'd hear of this. After they left, I sat in the quiet living room, surrounded by frozen memories on the mantel. Edwin's graduation, our beach trip when he was 10, my parents' anniversary. The house exhaled, silence. Time had rushed by without asking permission. One day, I was a mother juggling life. The next, I was an aging woman seen as a burden. The next morning, I woke with a splitting headache and nausea. My blood sugar was dangerously high. Hands trembling, I reached for the phone. "Dr. Reynolds can see you today at 3 o'clock, the nurse said after a short pause. "Judging by your symptoms, it's best not to delay your visit." I called work and took a sick day for the first time in many years. Carol sounded concerned. "You finally decided to take care of yourself," she said. "Do you want me to pick you up and take you to the doctor?" "No, I'll be fine," I replied, even though I was feeling worse. An unpleasant surprise awaited Maine Dr. Reynolds' office. After examining me and running some tests, he took off his glasses and looked at me with a serious expression. "Clarice, your blood sugar levels are significantly above normal. You are developing diabetic ketoacidosis, a a serious complication that requires immediate hospitalization. But I can't go to the hospital, I protested. I have work projects. If you don't go to the hospital now, the next time you come in, you could end up in intensive care, the doctor replied sternly. I've already called the hospital. They're waiting for you. So, in one day, my normal life fell apart as the paramedics helped me into the ambulance. I thought about how Edwin would use the situation as another argument for me to move into a nursing home. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. After all, stubbornness is a trait I inherited from both my parents. And it was this trait that helped me survive divorce, loneliness, and all the difficulties that life threw at me. Already in the hospital, lying under N4, I decided that it was time to stop sacrificing myself for a son who had long since grown up and chosen his own path. It was time to start living for myself, even if it meant standing up to my own child. The hospital room greeted me with sterile cleanliness and the smell of disinfectant. Daylight streamed in through the large window, but even it seemed artificial, filtered through the blinds. A nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and grey hair, helped me settle into the bed. My name is Bernice, she introduced herself as she hooked up the IV. I'll be taking care of you during the day shift. Dr. Coleman will come see you in about an hour after he gets ELIA test results. I nodded, feeling weak all over. Diabetic ketoacidosis was what Dr. Reynolds had called my condition. It sounded scary, although I knew it was a serious complication of diabetes that occurs when the body starts breaking down fat too quickly, and the liver converts the fat into ketones, which causes the blood to become acidic. It's a dangerous condition, especially at my age. Do you need anything? Bernice asked, finishing with the fourth. My phone, I replied. I need to call work. Bernice took my cell phone out of the bag that had been brought with me. Just a quick call, she warned. You need to rest. I called Carol, briefly explained the situation, and asked her to reschedule my meetings for the following week. My colleague sounded concerned, but I assured her that everything would be fine. Do you need anything from home? She asked. I can't stop. Buy and bring it to you. Thanks, but I'll call my son, I replied. Although the thought made me feel conflicted after talking to Carol, I dialed Edwin's number. He didn't answer until after the 5th ring. Mum, I have a meeting in 5 minutes, he said instead of saying, Hello. I'm at the hospital, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Diabetic crisis, the doctors say I'll have to stay here for a few days. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard him sigh heavily. Which hospital? More Herman, I replied. Endocrinology, 6th floor. Honora and I will come by tonight, he said after a pause. Do you need anything from home? I dictated a short list of items, and Edwin quickly said goodbye, citing the start of a meeting. I put the phone down on Thebes, feeling a familiar pang of sadness. Once upon a time, my little boy would cry if I was late coming home from work, and he would fall asleep only when he was holding my hand. Now, the news of my hospitalization elicited no more emotion from him than the weather forecast. Dr. Coleman was a tall man with premature grey hair and an attentive gaze. He studied my chart carefully, then sat down on a chair next to the bed. Mrs. Hampshire, you have severe diabetic ketoacidosis caused by prolonged decompensation of diabetes, he began. Your blood glucose level is critically high. There are signs of kidney damage, and we need to start intensive treatment immediately. How long will I have to stay here? I asked, thinking about the unfinished projects at work. At least a week, Dr. Coleman replied. Then we'll decide based on your progress. But I want to warn you that after you're discharged, you'll need more careful monitoring of your health, and possibly help with daily activities. The last sentence made me tense. That was exactly what I was. Afraid of, that my illness would become an excuse for Edwin and Honora to insist on a nursing home. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself, I said firmly. And you'll be able to take care of myself after I'm discharged too. Dr. Coleman looked at me with a slight smile. You seem like a very independent woman, Mrs. Hampshire, but sometimes, even the strongest of us need help. We'll talk about it later when you're feeling better. For now, rest and let us take care of you. The day dragged on. Nurses came to check on me, change my four, and take tests. I looked out the window at the hospital grounds where patients were walking with their relatives, and felt strangely cut off from the world. Over the years, I had become so accustomed to being busy, always on the go, always with a plan for the day that forced inactivity felt almost physically painful. Edwin and Honora arrived around 7 in the evening. My son looked tensioned, his wife looked slightly irritated, as if the hospital visit had disrupted their plans for the evening. We brought your things, Edwin said, placing a bag on a chair. How are you feeling? Anna asked, but there was no genuine interest in her voice. Better? I replied. The doctors say I'll have to stay here for a week. A week? Edwin asked, exchanging a quick glance with Honora. But who will look after the house? The house will be fine without me for a week, I said, feeling irritated. It's not the first time. That's not what I mean, Edwin frowned. What will happen when you're discharged? Will you be able to take care of yourself? Of course I can, I replied, trying to make my voice sound more confident than I felt. It's just a temporary setback. Dr. Coleman will adjust your medication and you'll be fine. Honora sat down on the edge of the bed, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping out a rhythm on her purse. Clarice, you're have to be realistic. Your condition is serious, and you live alone in a huge house. Edwin and I have already discussed this, and now is the time to consider a specialized facility where I will be under the supervision of doctors. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. I'm not going to discuss this now, Honora. I just got out of the hospital and don't even know the exact diagnosis or prognosis yet. But now it's time to think about it, she insisted. While you're here, we could start looking for a good place. There's a wonderful facility called Golden Autumn, not far from our house. It has everything you need. Medical staff, a swimming pool, hobby groups. I said, I don't want to discuss this, I repeated, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. Edwin, noticing my state, put his hand on his wife's shoulder. Not now, Honora. Mom's right. We need to wait for the doctor's conclusion. Honora pursed her lips, but didn't argue. The rest of their visit passed in tense silence, interrupted by occasional remarks about weather and Edwin's work. None of them asked what the doctors had said about my condition, what medication I had been prescribed, or how I was feeling. Instead, they discussed their plans for the weekend and the new car Edwin was thinking of buying. When they finally left, I felt both relieved and deeply sad. How had my only son become such a stranger? At what point had I lost touch with the child I had raised with so much love? The night in the hospital was restless. The noise of the machines, the nurse's footsteps in the hallway, the moans of the patient in the next room, it all kept me awake. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about my life, about the decisions that had brought me to this point. After my divorce from Harrison, I devoted myself entirely to Edwin in my work. There were men who showed interest in me, but I always found reasons to keep them at a distance. Edwin needed me, I told myself. He had just gone through his parents' divorce and needed stability. But the truth was that I was afraid to open up again, to trust someone again, and possibly be rejected again. When Edwin went to college, I could have started a new life, but the habit of being alone had become too ingrained. I threw myself into my work, climbing the career ladder, and told myself I was happy. And maybe I was acquiescent, predictable kind of happiness where every day was the same as the last. Then Edwin met Honor, and everything changed. She was ambitious, determined, and had a clear vision of what their life together should look like. And in that picture, there was no place for his mother, a simple municipal employee from an old-fashioned home. Gradually, Edwin began to distance himself. His visits became less frequent, and when he did come, he increasingly looked at me through Honora's eyes with slight condescension and hidden impatience. In the morning, Nurse Bernice woke me up to check my blood sugar. Better, she nodded approvingly, looking at the readings. But still a little high. How are you feeling? My head hurts less, I replied. And I'm not nauseous. That's a good sign. Bernice smiled. Dr. Coleman will stop by after his rounds. In the meantime, I'll bring your breakfast. It's a special diabetic diet, so don't expect any culinary delights. Breakfast was indeed meager. Sugar-free oatmeal, a slice of whole grain bread, and herbal tea. I ate without appetite, looking out the window at the day dawning. The sun was rising over Dallas, painting the skyscrapers in golden hues. Dr. Coleman appeared around 10, tablet in hand and a serious expression on his face. Good morning, Mrs. Hampshire. Your test results show improvement, but we still have a long way to go. The ketoacidosis has begun to correct itself, but your sugar levels are still too high. And there are signs of early diabetic neuropathy. Kidney damage. How serious is it? I asked, feeling my stomach tightened with fear. Serious enough to require constant monitoring and strict control of your diet and medication, the doctor replied. But not so serious that you need to panic. With the right treatment, many patients with these numbers live for many years without serious complications. What about my independence? I asked bluntly. My son and his wife are already planning to send me to a nursing home, but I want to stay in my own home. Dr. Coleman looked at me thoughtfully. That depends on a lot of factors, Mrs. Hampshire. How quickly you recover. Your ability to follow instructions and monitor your condition. If you have someone who could check on you regularly, at least in the beginning after your discharge, that would be ideal. I have friends, I said, even though I knew that in recent years I had become increasingly distant from my social circle, immersing myself in work and solitude. All right, the doctor nodded. We'll come back to that conversation closer to your discharge. Right. Now, we need to focus on your treatment. The day dragged on. Carol called to see how I was feeling and offered to stop by after work, but I declined, feeling too exhausted for visitors. Edwin didn't call. I spent most of the day dozing or staring out the window, trying not to think about the future, which had suddenly become so uncertain. In the evening, when the hospital corridors had fallen silent, and only the occasional footsteps of nurses broke the quiet, I heard familiar voices outside the door. Edwin and Honora had come again, but for some reason they were in no hurry to enter the room. I sat up in bed about to call them when heard snatches of their conversation. It's the perfect moment, Honora said in a hushed but insistent voice. Grandma clearly can't cope on her own anymore. This crisis is proof that she needs constant care. But she resists, Edwin replied. You know how stubborn she is. That's exactly why we need Tope now while she's in the hospital, Honora continued. I've already arranged for a viewing of Golden Autumn over the weekend, and we could start getting the house ready for sale. I've always said it's in a great location, and with a little renovation, it would be worth a lot more. Sell it? Edwin asked doubtfully. But it's my childhood home, which has become a burden for your mother. Honora interrupted him. Be realistic, Edwin. The house is too big for her. It needs constant care and repairs. By selling it, we could pay for several years in a good nursing home. And with the rest of the money, well, we've always talked about starting our own business. I felt my heart skip a beat. They were planning to sell my house. The house where I grew up, where I raised my son. A house full of memories of my parents and our family history. And not just sell it, but use money for their own purposes, hiding behind a veil of concern for my well-being. I don't know, Honora. Edwin's voice sounded uncertain. Maybe we're rushing into this. On the contrary, we've waited too long, she insisted. Your mother is 67. She has serious health problems and she lives alone in a huge house. It's irresponsible to let her take such a risk. Selling the house is simply the logical thing to do. She won't be able to look after it anyway, and sooner or later it will have to be done better now while the real estate market is booming. There was a pause, and he imagined my son frowning as he pondered his wife's words. When he spoke again, his voice sounded more determined. You're right. We need to act now. I'll talk to her about the nursing home today, and on the weekend we'll go see Golden Autumn. I'll also contact a real estate agent to have the house appraised. That's good, Honora said with satisfaction. And don't forget to mention that it's all for her own good. Old people like to be taken care of. I leaned back against the pillows, feeling a wave of anger and despair rising inside me. They were talking about me as if I were a helpless child or an incompetent adult. They were planning to take control of my life, my home, my future, without my consent or involvement. And worst of all, they were justifying it by saying they were doing it for my own good, when in reality, they were only thinking of their own interests. The door to the room opened and they entered with fake smiles on their faces. I pretended I had just woken up, not wanting them to know I had overheard their conversation. How are you feeling, Mom? Edwin asked, kissing on the cheek. A little better, I replied, trying to make my voice sound normal. We brought you some fruit, said Honora, placing a small basket on the bedside table. Although I'm not sure if you can have it with your diabetes. Thanks, I replied dryly. Edwin sat down on the edge of the bed, his faces serious. Mom, Honora, and I want to talk to you about something important. About the Golden Autumn nursing home? I asked bluntly, watching his eyes widen in surprise. How did you know? Hospitals are thin, I replied. And I'm not moving into a nursing home, Edwin. And I'm certainly not selling my house. Honora shot her husband an annoyed look as if he were to blame for my finding out about their plans. Clarice, be reasonable, she began in her condescending tone. Your health? My health is my business, I interrupted. And so is my house. But Mom, Edwin interjected. Dr. Coleman said, you need constant care and supervision. Did you talk to my doctor? I asked indignantly. We ran into him in the hallway, Edwin explained. He said, your condition is serious and requires constant monitoring. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. I appreciate your concern, but I will make my own decisions about my life. And I'm not going anywhere. But who will take care of you? Asked Honora. Edwin and I work all day. We can't constantly check on you to make sure you're all right. I'm not asking you to do that, I replied. I've managed just fine on Mjorn all these years, and I'll continue to do so. The conversation continued in the same vein for a while longer. They tried to convince me, and I refused to even consider their offer. Finally, Honora lost her patience. All right, we'll talk about this when you're in a more reasonable mood, she said, getting up. Come on, Edwin, we have to go. My son looked upset, but he obediently followed his wife. At the door, he turned around. Mum, we just want what's best for you. I know, dear, I replied softly. But you have to understand that best for me is not the same as best for you. After they left, I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Thoughts swirled around in my head, giving me no peace. What if they were right? What if I really couldn't live on my own anymore? What if the next crisis was even worse and there was no one around to call an ambulance? But then I remembered their conversation in Thelway, their plans to sell my house and use the money for their business. No, it wasn't about caring for me. It was about convenience for them and financial gain. I took my phone out of the knitstand and stared at it for a long time, thinking there was one person who might be able to help me. A person with whom I had a complicated history, but who knew me better than anyone else. Garrison. We hadn't spoken in several years, not since Edwin married Honor. Garrison had flown in for the wedding. We had exchanged a few polite words at the reception, and he had flown back to Arizona the next day. But before that, for many years after the divorce, we had maintained a calm, respectful relationship. He called on Christmas and my birthday, and we sometimes exchanged emails. He knew about my diabetes and always asked about my health. And most importantly, he knew the history of our house. The house I had inherited from my parents and which was part of a complex family trust my father had set up to protect the family property. A trust that Edwin seemed to have forgotten or never knew about. I dialed Harrison's number before I could change my mind. He answered on the third ring. Clarice. His voice sounded surprised but not unpleasant. Is something wrong? Yes, I replied, suddenly feeling tears welling up in my throat. I need your help, Garrison. What happened? His voice sounded genuinely concerned. I'm in the hospital, I said. Diabetic crisis, and Edwin and Honora are planning to sell my house and put me in a nursing home. What? Garrison exclaimed. Without your consent? They can't do that. They think they can, I said with a bitter smile. They've already contacted a real estate agent and are looking at places in a nursing home. What about the trust? Garrison asked. They can't sell the house without the consent of all the beneficiaries. I'm not sure Edwin remembers the trust, I replied. He was only 15 when my father set it up, and I never discussed the legal details with him after that. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Garrison spoke in a determined tone. Listen, Clarice, I'll fly to Dallas. I had a business trip planned for next week anyway, but I can move it up a few days. I'm still listed as a beneficiary in the trust, right? Yes, I confirmed. My father insisted on it despite our divorce. He always respected you. Then I'll help you sort this out, Garrison said firmly. Edwin can't control your life and your property just because you're in the hospital. That's absurd. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. The third day in the hospital was a little easier than the previous ones. My blood sugar was gradually decreasing and the weakness and dizziness was subsiding. Dr. Coleman was pleased with my progress, although he warned me not to get too excited. You're on the mend, Mrs. Hampshire, but diabetic ketoacidosis is a serious condition. We need to make sure your kidneys aren't damaged and that the new treatment plan is working consistently. I nodded, trying to look like a compliant patient. After talking to Garrison the previous evening, I felt hopeful that I could stand up to Edwin and Honora's plans. It gave me strength and determination to get well as soon as possible. Garrison said he was flying to Dallas in 3 days. I didn't tell my son about this, deciding to wait until my ex-husband arrived. I knew Edwin would be unhappy with my decision to seek help from his father, with whom he had always had a difficult relationship. The day passed quietly. Carol stopped by after work, bringing fresh flowers and the latest office gossip. Her sincere concern for my health warmed my heart, At least someone really cared about me, and not just my possessions. By evening, I felt well enough to get out of bed and walk around the ward a little. Nurse Bernice nodded approvingly when she saw me on my feet. That's good. Movement helps the blood circulate better. Just don't overdo it. I had just returned to bed when the phone rang. The screen lit up with Edwin's name. I sighed, bracing myself for another unpleasant conversation, and answered. Hi, Edwin. Mom? My son's voice sounded excited, almost jubilant. I have great news. Really? I asked cautiously, feeling every muscle in my body tense. I'm getting married. Tomorrow, he blurted out. Anora and I have decided to renew our wedding vows. It's our 5th anniversary, just a small ceremony with our closest friends. Congratulations, I replied, trying to sound sincere. That's unexpected. And that's mortal, Edwin continued, oblivious to the tension in my voice. Your car and house are sold. My heart skipped a beat. Despite my conversation with Harrison, despite knowing about the trust, hearing my own son casually announce the sale of me property was painful. What do you mean? I asked, trying to sound calm. We found a great buyer for your house, Edwin explained. A young family willing to pay even more than market value because they fell in love with the location and the architecture. And your Honda will be bought by one of Honor's colleagues. It's a bit old, of course, but he's a fan of that model. And when did you manage to arrange all this? My voice grew colder. Anora and I have been working on it for the last 2 days. Edwin replied with a hint of pride. Everything went even faster than we expected. I have power of attorney over your affairs. Remember? You signed it last year when you thought you were going to have eye surgery. I vaguely remembered signing a document before a possible cataract operation, which in the end wasn't necessary. Edwin had insisted at the time that it was a standard precaution. I had no idea that the power attorney was still valid. And you didn't think you should have discussed this with me first? I asked, feeling anger rising inside me. Well, you're in the hospital, Mum, he said, his voice taking on a condescending tone. You need to focus on getting better, not worrying about things like this. Besides, Anora and I have already found the perfect place for you at Golden Autumn. A private room with a view of the garden, 3 meals a day and medical staff on call around the clock. And what about the money from the sale of the house? I asked bluntly. There was a short pause on the other end of the line. Most of it will go toward paying for your stay at Golden Autumn. Of course, Edwin said. But there was something in his voice that made me wary. It's not cheap, And we'll put the rest in an account to cover your medical expenses. I could almost physically feel him avoiding a direct answer. Is that all? I insisted. No other plans for the money? Well, Anora has been thinking about opening a small bookshop, Edwin admitted reluctantly. But that's secondary, Mum. Your well-being's the most important thing. I closed my eyes, feeling anger give way to deep sadness. My son, my boy who once ran to me with his joys and sorrows, was now controlling my life without the slightest regard for my wishes. So Edwin summed up, taking my silence as agreement. Anora and I will pick you up when you're discharged and take you straight to Golden Autumn. They're already preparing your room and your things from home. Well, the room there isn't very big, so we'll pick out the essentials and the rest. Sell them? I finished for him. Most of them, yes. He replied without a hint of embarrassment. But we'll keep the most valuable things, of course. Photo albums, for example. And maybe your grandmother's silver. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. This was the decisive moment. I could have made a scene, screamed, cried, accused my son of betrayal, but that would only have convinced him that I was unstable and incapable of making decisions. Instead, I decided to act calmly and deliberately, Okay, I said in an even voice, but you haven't taken one thing into account. What do you mean? There was a hint of concern in his voice. I chuckled softly, imagining the look on his face when he found out the truth. The house you sold never belonged entirely to me, Edwin. What do you mean? His voice was now clearly alarmed. The house is part of a family trust, I explained. Your grandfather created it to protect the family property. Under the terms of the trust, the house cannot be sold without the consent of all the beneficiaries. What other beneficiaries? Edwin's voice rose with tension. Your father, for example, I replied calmly. Garrison is still listed in the trust despite our divorce. Your grandfather respected him very much and insisted on it. And then there's my brother Frank and his children. But Edwin was clearly stunned. Why didn't you ever tell me about this? You never asked, I replied simply. You were a teenager when the trust was set up, and you weren't very interested in legal details. And then when you grew up, the subject never came up. There was silence. On the other end of the line, I could almost see Edwin feverishly trying to digest this information and assess the implications. You're joking, right? He finally managed to say. This is some kind of trick to avoid moving into a nursing home, isn't it? Not at all, I replied. Check the house documents, Edwin. All the trust documents are in my home office in the top right hand drawer of the desk. It's a large blue folder labeled Hampshire Family Trust. But I've already signed a preliminary sales agreement. Panic crept into his voice. The buyers have put down a deposit. Well, you'll have to give them their money back. I shrugged, though he couldn't see me. Because any transaction with the consent of all the beneficiaries of the trust is invalid. And by the way, your father is flying into Dallas in a few days. My father? Edwin now sounded genuinely frightened. Did you contact him? Yes, I confirmed last night. He was very concerned when he found out that you were trying to dispose of my property without my consent. But I did it for your own good. You need care, medical supervision, Edwin exclaimed. Which I can get without giving up my home, I said firmly. And without letting you and Honor use the money from its sale to open a bookstore. So that's what this is about. His voice became cold. You've always been against Honore, against our plans. You just didn't want us to be happy. The injustice hit harder than I expected. After all the years I had put his interests above my own, after all the sacrifices I had made for his well-being, he was accusing of selfishness. I've always wanted only your happiness, Edwin, I said quietly. But not at the expense of my own well-being, and not in this way. Your father turned you against me, didn't he? He accused. He always knew how to manipulate you. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me, but I forced myself to remain calm. Garrison has nothing to do with this, I replied. This is your own doing. Edwin, you decided to take control of my life and my property without my consent. You didn't even ask me what I wanted, because you're a stubborn old woman who can't see past the end of her nose. He blurted out. And I could almost physically feel something break between us. You don't understand that Honora and I are doing this out of concern for you. That doesn't sound like caring, Edwin. My voice trembled. Not from weakness, but from suppressed emotions. Means respecting another person's wishes even if you don't agree with them. Caring means asking, not deciding for someone else. You know what? Do whatever you want. Stay in your old house until it falls apart. Keep living in the past, but don't expect Honora and me to be there for you when your next crisis hits. I wasn't expecting that, I replied quietly. And by the way, congratulations on renewing your vows. Too bad you didn't think to invite me. We thought you'd be in the hospital, he muttered, no longer as confident as before. Sure, I nodded. Convenient. Excuse. After a brief intense goodbye, I hung up and sat for a long time staring into space. Despite my victory, and it was a victory, I had kept my home and my independence. I felt a deep sadness. My son, my only child, the person I love most in the world, had been capable of such betrayal. Perhaps I had been naive, failing to notice the signs of his selfishness before. Or maybe I just didn't want to see them, preferring to believe that somewhere deep down he was still the caring boy I had raised. But now the illusions were gone, and I saw the truth in all its ugliness. I picked up the phone and dialed Garrison's number. He answered almost immediately. "Clarice, is something wrong?" "Edwin just called," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He said he sold the house and my car, and already booked me into a nursing home." Damn it! Garrison swore, which was rare for him. "He can't do that.